If you compare beer with bratwurst,
and cheese with wine,
or even whiskey
with donuts,
then we think you can pair all of these delicious drinks with
murder,
conspiracies,
missing persons,
and more.
Drink with us as you feed your craving for true crime and creepy stories.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Perfectly Paired With podcast. I'm Jason. This is Katie. If you haven't listened to this and this is your first episode, we do a podcast where Katie, my wife, tells me a story, true crime story, and I pair it with a drink, and we kind of just have a discussion from there, getting a little buzzed or a lot of buzzed, and discussing some finer details in the stories. Katie, give us a little bit about what we're talking about today.
On the night of August 30th, 1961, a ferocious thunderstorm hit Tacoma, Washington. The Burr family, which included married couple Donald and Beverly and their 4 children, had gone to bed, protected from the wind and rain, in their brick English bungalow. But by the time the sun would rise the next morning, it would be clear that the family was not as safe and sound as they thought. When Beverly woke with a bad feeling, the first thing she did was check on her children. And Beverly would soon realize that her bad feeling was for a good reason. Only 3 of her 4 children were home. Anne, the oldest, was gone.
Oh, man. All right. So we got a missing person.
A missing child.
Missing child. This always makes it worse. All right. Well, now I'm excited to hear how this unfolds. You didn't tell me a whole lot as usual. And I had a state, a city, and that a thunderstorm happened.
Mm-hmm.
Those were my clues. So I went with the states.
Perfect.
I did look for thunderstorm type things and felt like we've had a lot of beer lately. So
yeah.
I decided not to go with the beer.
Although I'm looking at what you picked, but I feel like we've also had a lot of that.
Yeah, but you can't have too much. Well, I guess you can. So we went with Woodinville. This is straight bourbon whiskey. This comes from, handmade in Washington State. It's a pretty popular bourbon. I know I've had it before. I cannot remember what it tasted like. Pretty sure my brother gave me some, or maybe somebody else. Anyway, I do remember liking it though. There's a whole lot about it on here. I won't go into all of it because they give a good, decent paragraph on this. But we'll tell you what we think, and you probably should check it out because it's pretty popular. So, would you like ice?
Yeah, I think that would be necessary. Because unlike my husband, I am not a novice at drinking, or maybe I am the novice.
You are the novice, yeah.
At drinking whiskeys and bourbons. And so if we could water that down. I make Michael Scott references on a fairly regular basis about whiskey, so I shan't do that this time. I'll just ask for ice.
Man up for it, or to it. Instead of asking for Splenda.
I'll make the sound. And he's just free pouring, which is always concerning to me. Because he and his friends will drink bourbon. And that's a pour for them. Yeah, I want the smaller one. Thank you.
I think I did that on purpose. One more cube for you.
So just off the bat, it smells like a pretty routine whiskey.
Yeah, it does. Now this one is just their
my
base.
nose hair just sizzled.
Got a little heat on there. This one is their just regular one. I think this was like $34. And then they had their next one, which was like a port cask. And actually that one might be the one I've had before. I think it was brought to a whiskey tasting night of mine. Anyway,
You're
couldn't believe how much more the other ones are. Like that one
Ooh.
was like 50. Then the next one was 75. Then it
Well,
went
this
all
one
the way up to
burns all the
100.
way down. And to people who like this type of beverage, I'm going to be super offensive. I think that would be good in Coke. Because, and let me explain my reasoning, I think it has a very nice flavor. It's just incredibly strong. And I think a little sweet to cut it
Mm-hmm.
would be delightful. It's not bad, to be very honest. Like, it's not as intense as I think that I've had because you really enjoy this type of drink, but it's also not as bland and almost like sickly sweet as like a,
Yeah. Some
I
of
don't
the
want to
ones.
say like a Jim Beam.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that's just a little bit.
Yep. That one's
There's dimension
less
to
to
this.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I like that.
Yeah. I agree.
But I would like it with some Coke.
That is very offensive, but we'll forgive you. I like
I
it
just
a
like
lot.
Coca-Cola.
It's and we did, when you take it off the top of the bottle, you're always going to have a little bit more heat.
True.
At the
Because
beginning
heat
there.
rises.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the science behind it.
Well, a delicious bourbon whiskey from the, I'm assuming, beautiful state of Washington
Yep.
is
It's handmade in Washington. Yeah.
perfectly paired
Yeah.
with a story about a missing girl from Tacoma, Washington, who may or may not be connected to my favorite serial killer. So here we go.
Oh man.
Beverly met her future husband, Don, while attending the University of Washington. The couple married in the summer of 1951, and over the next 10 years, the couple would have 4 children. At the time of her disappearance, Anne was the oldest, and she was 8 years old. Julie was 7, Greg was 5, and Mary, who was the youngest, was just 3 years old. On Wednesday, August 30th, Anne and her siblings spent the day playing in their neighborhood with friends, trying to enjoy the last few days of summer vacation. A friend of Anne's had invited her over for a sleepover that night, but as Beverly, Anne's mom, was busy preparing her kids for the start of the school year, she told Anne that a sleepover was pretty much out of the question. That night, Greg and Julie, which are the middle 2 Burr children, went to sleep in a fort they had built in the basement of their home. And because of this, Mary, the youngest, was allowed to sleep in Anne's room with her. At 11 p.m., Dawn and Beverly locked up the house. Dawn put the family dog, Barney, who is a black Cocker Spaniel, on the landing between the kitchen and the back door, while Beverly fastened the lock chain on the front door. A window in the living room was always kept slightly open so that cords could run from the TV out to the TV antenna.
Okay.
At some point that night, Anne walked her little sister Mary into her parents' bedroom because a cast, which was worn by Mary, was bothering the young girl. But after speaking to her daughters, Beverly told both girls to go back to bed. That would be the last time Beverly ever saw Anne.
And Anne had the cast or didn't?
Her little sister had the cast.
Jeez. How did she break her arm?
Do you think that was in the material from 50 years ago?
I never know. I just promised the people we'd discuss the finer details.
I think she fell out of a tree.
Yeah.
That would be my guess.
It's a pretty typical thing for a kid.
Yes.
Shocking that our kids haven't done that yet.
Knock on wood.
Yeah.
Jeez Louise. Then a storm rolled in. The storm was so powerful that numerous trees blew down, and there were multiple power outages all across Washington. So that night, when Beverly and Dawn heard Barney the dog barking, they both chalked it up to Barney responding to the raging wind and rain. And they did not investigate as to why he was barking, even though they both had heard strange noises coming from their yard at various times throughout that summer.
Okay.
At about 5:15 a.m. on the morning of the 31st, Mary woke and decided to check on her children. Beverly found both Julie and Greg asleep in their basement fort. But when Beverly entered the room where Anne and Mary were supposed to have been sleeping, Anne was gone. When Beverly searched the house, she noticed that the living room window, which was only usually open slightly, was now completely wide open, and the front door, which she had latched and locked the night before, was now standing ajar. So wearing her bathrobe, Beverly went to the neighbors in search of her young daughter.
How old is Anne again?
8. Now, besides having neighbors, the Burr home was also located next to a small orchard, and this orchard was dense with apple trees and raspberry bushes. When none of the neighbors reported having seen the young girl that morning, Beverly returned home, and upon approaching her house, she noticed that a bench had been placed beneath the living room window, indicating that someone could have used the bench to open the window all the way and then possibly enter the home in order to abduct Anne.
Is this the window or the thing that was left open for the wires?
Yeah. Yes.
Oh, the good old days. You needed to put an antenna on your roof and leave a window open
and
so
then your
watch
kid goes
TV.
missing. So you could watch the Andy Griffith Show.
And this is Tacoma, right?
Yes.
Which, and looking at a map today, it looks like Tacoma's a pretty formidable city now. But it looks, I mean, it reminds me a little bit of like a Denver, where back then it's a small town, pretty much. You know, like it's not a large city like LA or something.
There's details we're not going to go into, but Washington has had a very interesting history in terms of like kids getting kidnapped, which I chose not to like chronicle. So I can't imagine even back then Tacoma was super small. I think Washington was pretty robust and thriving.
Is that a lot of kids get kidnapped in the woods, right? Like when people are camping.
Those are aliens and Bigfoot. We've covered this. Now, it was after the discovery of the bench that Beverly decided to call the police. In search of his daughter, Dawn, and his brother, Raleigh, began looking through the neighborhood for any sign of Anne or what could have happened to her. Eventually, Dawn and Raleigh found themselves on the campus of the University of Puget Sound, which was about 2 blocks from the Burr home. Now, at that time, there were 7 different campus buildings that were under construction, and there were several deep ditches from the excavation that had recently taken place. While looking for any sign of his daughter, Dawn noticed what looked to be a teenage boy kicking dirt into one of those excavated ditches. And as Dawn would recall, this teenage boy had a strange smirk on his face, a smirk that Dawn was never, ever able to forget.
On the boy's face.
As he's kicking dirt into this hole. Watching these 2 men like look for Anne. Anne! 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 And this boy is just like
being creepy AF,
smirking,
I guess.
Kicking dirt. Yeah. It's just strange.
Interesting. Does that come of anything?
I bet you it does.
Good.
I can't imagine I would add it if it didn't.
Well, you never know with these stories sometimes. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, this guy was really weird, but we never checked it out.
Well,
and this time it's a kid.
He's a weird teenage kid that I think you should remember.
Okay, teenage.
He's a teenager. Now, despite not finding any sign of Anne while out looking with his brother, Don would tell investigators that he believed they needed to return to the campus and search those specific excavated sites. Now, the first news story that reported Anne's disappearance mentioned that an 8-year-old girl living in Tacoma had gone missing from her bed, but that she could be a victim of amnesia. But despite that initial reporting indicating some hope that young Anne simply wandered off, perhaps gotten confused or lost in the storm, officers immediately posted themselves up in the family's basement in hopes of a ransom call, which again speaks to this very interesting situation happening in Washington where kids were getting kidnapped and ransoms were being asked for them. Like, it wasn't unusual for the state of Washington.
Okay. Is it still that way? Because when you said that before, I just thought you meant like compiled in the past, 40 years. Washington's had a lot of this. It was that way then. Is it still
and I wouldn't
a
even
place
say
where
it
a lot of
was
people go missing?
that way then. There are just 2 or 3 specific, very notorious cases of young kids getting kidnapped, ransom being asked. Sometimes in one of the cases, the kid was returned after the ransom was paid. Okay. Another one, the kid was found dead. So,
all right. And is Anne the kid that asked for a sleepover?
Anne was the girl whose friend asked her to have a sleepover.
Yeah, and
the mom was like,
said,
nope,
no,
school's coming. Labor Day's on Monday. You've got to get your sleeping habits back in alignment.
That's exactly what we say every summer.
And this woman probably kicked herself every day for the rest of her life for not letting Anne have a sleepover.
But if Anne wasn't taken, it would have been one of the others.
Possibly.
So don't beat yourself up, lady.
Oh, dead Beverly. Both Dawn and Beverly are dead now.
Oh, well. Yeah, they just shouldn't have left a window open.
Correct.
Every single fucking night.
Correct. Now, by the time the second edition of the Tacoma News Tribune, which initially reported on Anne's disappearance, by the time the second edition came out, the tone of the reporting had totally changed. Now the headline read, quote, "Girl, 8 vanished from home. Chief Hager calls for wide hunt," end quote. And this hunt became the largest search in Tacoma history. It lasted for months.
Oh, wow.
Now, investigators would heed what Dawn had suggested, and they searched the University of Puget Sound's campus. But not until 4 days after Anne had gone missing. And by that time, the open ditches had been filled in, and cars had actually started driving over the newly formed ground.
Dang.
So they couldn't find Anne, even if she was there.
Couldn't even check anymore.
Correct. At the Burr home, the scene of Anne's disappearance, investigators did recover a few pieces of evidence. There was a red thread that had gotten snagged on a brick below the living room window. That living room window was standing open the morning Anne was discovered missing. There was also a shoe print on the bench that had been positioned below the window. Based on the size of the shoe print, investigators believed that it most likely belonged to a teenage boy or a small man.
Oh, man. Go ahead and I'll talk for a second so you can take a drink. I guess we've been narrating so much here.
Wet my whistle.
That I'm already putting pieces together, guessing where you're going. I won't say it, but I hope folks are too. You did mention an individual earlier.
Well, I didn't say him by name, and only at this point you know who I could possibly be referencing as my favorite.
Yeah. Oh, yes, you're right.
So
you didn't say his name.
Don't say his name.
I won't. Just out of curiosity, is he a teenager at this time?
Strangely enough,
I don't know the years.
This individual would have been a teenager at this time.
Hot damn! So we could be looking at like the amongst the first.
We could be looking at the very
first.
Yes, and my husband has knowledge that all of you listeners don't have, so we gotta keep going. I want to keep them in suspense for too long.
They're all just trying to guess like who, and I guarantee you there's some people that are like,
the state is pretty
who you're talking about.
Pretty clear in terms of who I could potentially be talking about. Now, in an article published in 2014, according to Detective Gene Miller, who was at that point in time the lead investigator on this case, in addition to the already mentioned pieces of evidence, there was also a partial palm print that was lifted from the bench and a small quantity of biological evidence, which was found at the point of entry, which I'm assuming was the window.
What's biological evidence mean?
human secretions or matter that could potentially contain DNA. So it could be saliva, could be sweat.
Sperm.
Yeah.
What
yes.
else?
Also,
no, never mind. Go ahead.
Also, 3 different neighbors reported to officials that they had seen someone looking into the windows of the Burr residence. Now, I couldn't find clarification as to whether they reported seeing somebody the night Anne disappeared or they just had seen somebody at different times during their recent memory. But 3 neighbors, they were like, somebody's been looking in their windows.
Did they tell them?
That's a really good question.
If I see somebody looking in my neighbor's window, I don't even care if I talk to them, once a year or all the time. I'm going to make sure the next time I see them, I'm like, hey, dude, somebody's looking in my window. Also, I'd actually probably just call the cops at that point. Be like, hey, I don't know, something weird is going on.
Well, we're going to talk about what life is like in Washington at this time. So perhaps it wasn't that out of the norm. Now, it's in 2 paragraphs.
What year? I remembered what I was going to say. Or question I was going to ask. What year is this again?
61.
61.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right, we're
1961.
We are in the Wayback Machine. All right.
Yes, Mr. Peabody. Dr. Peabody and Mr. Sherman.
Yep.
Now, I have to scroll down because I had to verify it was 1961. Investigators did try to question young Mary, Anne's sister, who shared a room with her the night Anne went missing. But at the age of 3, she was simply too young to provide any valuable information to officers.
And even if she could give you something, you wouldn't know whether you could believe it or not.
Well, and we can...
I mean, at least it would be something, but...
We can table this for conversing at the end. There's a lot of question as to whether Anne was abducted from the bedroom or Anne had gotten up because of the storm sounds and this individual simply called her over to the window and then had Anne open the door and just took Anne from the front of the house, or if this person actually got into the home, went to Anne's bedroom and just carried her out the front door. There's so many unanswered questions.
Sure. If I had to guess, I guess he went inside. Because I don't think Anne would be. You said there was one of the lock chains, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't think she'd be tall enough to get that.
That's a good point.
I mean, could you see our daughter getting that? Because it's only a year.
Well, our
difference.
daughter, who is close to that age, I could see her figuring anything out.
Of course,
you know.
Yeah, you could bring over a chair, but that would be left then. And I just don't think there was enough signs to show a kid trying to open that. So it would be him coming in and
just stealthily navigating the home.
Yeah, but
picking her up out of her bed.
Yeah,
I don't know. We can discuss it once we're done.
That would be
incredibly difficult.
Because what if she wakes up? She's going to start screaming. And you're right there in the halls.
Hold on to whether or not she would start screaming. Because I'm not done telling you this story.
Oh, jeez.
Now, despite the small amount of evidence, that didn't mean that officers weren't developing theories as to who could be the culprit responsible for Anne's disappearance. Now, I'm going to quote it. According to the missing persons report on Anne, police records were full of people living in the area who were, quote, sex perverts, exhibitionists, sex oddballs, queers, and women with lesbian tendencies, end quote. And it was after his daughter...
That's the neighborhood.
Yes. And it was after his daughter went missing, Dawn saw suspicious neighbors everywhere. For one, there was a woman who lived across the street who had recently spent some time in an insane asylum after giving birth to a mixed-race child. And there was also a man in the neighborhood who would sunbathe naked. And when he wasn't doing that, he would give the visiting neighborhood children candy, which would only encourage them to visit him again. And the weekend after Anne disappeared, so Labor Day weekend, neighbors found it very strange that a man was going door to door selling cookware, and yet he had no pots or pans with him. Which kind of reminds me of Uncle Rico and Napoleon Dynamite with this like plastic Tupperware. This guy was like, do you want to buy this pot? And they're like, what pot? So I forgot. I don't actually have a pot.
Do you have any children home? Maybe they can imagine the pot here.
So apparently Washington was just kind of full of, which...
Well, Tacoma.
To be honest.
I mean, that's... Yeah, Washington's... Washington, I've always, same with Oregon. Like those areas are just kind of like big boulders, like Boulder.
You have
Colorado.
to explain what you mean by that, because a boulder is also a giant rock.
Like a giant boulder, Colorado.
So here in Colorado, we have a city called Boulder.
Well, yeah, everybody knows what Boulder is. I mean, they know it's a city in Colorado anyway. But Boulder is a very, it's always just been a hippie,
a place where people can let whatever flag they fly, just fly.
But it's one of the most beautiful cities on earth because it sits like right under the Flatirons, which are giant mountains here at the front of our Rocky Mountains in the Metro Denver area. And yeah, it sits right at the base of that. And it's, I mean, we lived there for a little while, and it's one of the most beautiful places you can live.
I very much enjoyed living in Boulder. But
very, very, like just liberal city, has always been that way, but like the true, like old fashioned liberal of just like free love.
But to speak to this story, if your child went missing from her home in your neighborhood, you would start suspecting like all of your neighbors. Like I would be analyzing every single person in our neighborhood. Like, yeah, you could have done it.
That
you know what I mean?
Makes me think of since we were talking about Boulder and another missing girl.
Oh, JonBenet Ramsey.
JonBenet. And her parents weren't questioning. Oh, no, they did question a few of the, not neighbors, though. It wasn't really neighbors.
No,
it was,
they actually didn't question a lot of people.
In fact, they had their neighbors just come over right away.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's strange. Anyway, go on.
But alas, none of those individuals turned into legitimate people of interest, let alone suspects.
I love the initial report. Was that written by a cop, or is that what dad is saying to the cop?
Nope, that's in the police report.
So the police are saying like they got. I don't want to know like who was it or what individuals did they decide to pin as sexual perverts.
To be honest, I picture it as just like this police officer clerk who's no good in the streets, so he has to take reports at a desk. And he's just like listening to like the report, and then his mind just goes to, I know that neighborhood. It's full of.
Yeah. Or
he's like, Tony.
He's going door to door.
Sex oddball.
Dudes are answering the door with like a robe wide open, nothing under.
Exhibitionist.
Damn it.
Check mark.
Didn't need to see that today.
Yeah.
Some ladies are like, oh, come on in. Let's talk about this.
Yeah, seriously.
I'll get you a glass of whiskey. And like sexual perverts.
Woodville whiskey.
Yeah,
Wood.
Good old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Good old Woodville.
I mean, it's Woodinville, but you could also think of it as Woodyville.
It's got like a shine on it. I was trying to read it.
Oh, yeah, it's all right. But Woodyville, you know?
Now, a pause.
The pervert's whiskey.
A pause from the population that was living in Tacoma. Early on, investigators had one interesting theory as to what could have happened to Anne. Living in the Tacoma area, so not actually like Tacoma, but probably like a close suburb, was another man named Donald Burr. And this Donald Burr was very, very wealthy, making his living as an architect. He had a daughter, Deborah, who was close to Anne in age, and he had just gone through a very messy divorce from Deborah's mom. And investigators wondered if perhaps Anne had been mistakenly kidnapped, either to get a ransom payment or as part of a custody disagreement. But that line of investigative thinking never panned out as anything more than a coincidence and a theory.
Darn.
Now, through the search for Anne and over the course of the investigation, Officers did consider several suspects. For one, there was a teen neighbor, not the one that I've been alluding to, secretively this whole time, who had reportedly flirted with Anne, who at 8 years old, I just get like, ugh,
Ew.
cringy. But this neighbor would...
Who reported that?
I don't know.
Probably the parent now.
Or just people
everybody's a
wanting
pervert.
to have something to say when a girl goes missing.
Yeah.
But ultimately, that individual would pass a polygraph exam and investigators would move on. Then, in 1964, an auto parts salesman from Spokane, Washington, abducted a 10-year-old girl and drove with her for days around the Pacific Northwest in his Buick convertible. His young victim would be released and she would be found alive, but the suspect would shoot himself before the FBI could bring him into custody, where he could have been asked about a possible connection to missing Ann Burr.
Okay.
So he
Spokane,
Spokane,
Washington.
I would say Spokane.
Spokane, Washington.
And
Have you looked at a map like where that is?
You know what? I actually have.
Washington is it's a big state. It's a kind of like Colorado, where it's just almost a square or a rectangle, I guess is what we are. I mean, nobody's perfect like Colorado, but
so
it's
is
the
a
same
good distance.
type
It's
of
almost
size and
300
shape.
miles.
Okay.
But it's also a number of years later.
So it's kind of more closer to the border.
It's
of
actually,
one of the other states.
I think it's interior.
Okay.
Yeah, Tacoma.
Yeah, because Tacoma's on the
kind of
it's on the coast.
pretty close to the, yeah.
Well, it is on the coast. Like they have docks and stuff there. At least the maps I was looking at.
It is on the coast. And Spokane is almost on the border between Washington and another state.
Gotcha.
But it's a significant number of years. It's 3 years later. So this individual could have traveled the 4 hours and 30 minutes in those 3 years.
Oh, yeah. Could have walked in those 3 years.
He could have crawled. Now, investigators got their next big break in 1965 when an inmate serving time in Oklahoma confessed to Ann's abduction. He said that he and a friend abducted and killed Ann while they worked as bean pickers on a farm in Oregon, which is just due
Yeah, it's right above it, right?
south.
Is it south?
It,
Look at that map.
Oregon is south of Washington.
That's kind of far, isn't it, from Tacoma?
Yes.
Yeah.
However, the suspect was flown into Washington to accompany investigators into a field to look for Ann's remains. But shocker, no remains were found. So I just think he wanted a free vacation from Oklahoma
Probably.
to Washington.
Somebody told him, I heard if you fess up to a crime and tell them where a body's buried, they'll take you out for a little bit.
He's like, I was a bean picker in Oregon. That is close enough. They will fly me out.
Bean pickers. A lot of beans come from Oregon.
I'm assuming.
All right.
Green beans.
Yeah, you can grow those anywhere, I'm sure. Okay.
Now, another teenage boy was living in Ann's Tacoma neighborhood.
No.
And years later, he would be named as a suspect. At the time Ann went missing, this boy was 14 years old and was known to officers then as a peeping Tom and a shoplifter.
And all the neighbors said they
Yeah.
saw somebody, which you would think they'd be like, I don't know, it's like a teenager, 14 years old. So,
Yeah.
I mean, boys are a little bit harder to pin down exactly what age they are, depending on
Yeah,
the
but you
height.
still don't
But
want
you
one
still would
looking
be
in
like-
the front
But
window.
I know, but you still know that they're a teenager.
leaving biological material behind.
Yeah. Unless, the neighbor's a sexual pervert and just like watched him doing that and then also left
Candy, when you're done there, I've got candy for you.
or just watched them watching the family and everybody's just having their own.
Just a bunch of weirdos
Just a bunch of
living in the
weirdos.
neighborhood.
Yeah. Anyway, my whole point was you would think that whoever's saying like, yeah, we've seen people like peeping in the windows, it would be like a teenage boy peeping in the windows. But yeah, maybe that's what they said. Maybe it's not.
A family friend of the Burrs would even say that Anne was familiar with this boy, that they knew each other, and that she would even trail behind him as he delivered newspapers. This young man was Theodore Bundy, but the world would come to know him as Ted. While on death row, Ted gave 2 different interviews, one in 1980 and the other in 1981. And speaking in the third person, Ted told 2 different journalists a story about killing a young girl in an orchard.
Oh. Really?
Yes.
But they searched the orchard.
It doesn't mean he couldn't have killed her in the apple orchard next to the Burr family home. Because
he fessed up to like all the killings, and there was a number of bodies that they couldn't find. And maybe it was that he,
well, we're going to talk numbers in a moment.
So good at killing and hiding.
Now, Beverly, Anne's mother, in hopes of getting answers and possibly closure, wrote to Ted Bundy and specifically asked if he had anything to do with the disappearance of her daughter. And Ted Bundy wrote back. And this is what he said. Quote, "Dear Beverly, thank you for your letter of May 30th. I can certainly understand you doing everything you can to find your daughter. Unfortunately, you have been misled by what can only be called rumors about me. The best thing I can do for you is to correct these rumors, these falsehoods. First and foremost, I do not know what happened to your young daughter, Anne Marie. I had nothing to do with her disappearance. You said she disappeared August 31, 1961. At the time, I was a normal 14-year-old boy. I did not wander the streets late at night. I did not steal cars. I had absolutely no desire to harm anyone. I was just an average kid. For your sake, you really must understand this. Again and finally, I did not abduct your daughter. I had nothing to do with her disappearance. If there is still something you wish to ask me about this, please don't hesitate to write again. God bless you and be with you. Peace, Ted." End quote.
That's so weird. Thinking about like, it's such a disappointment for the mom, but at the same time, you gotta think there's a little part of her that's like, holy shit, Ted Bundy wrote me back. Like, I know everything he did is heinous. I am not.
I don't think that's what I would have thought. That's not what she thought. I think, but there's got to be a little bit. Absolutely, but she's destroyed.
Or, actually, I bet you anything she thinks he's lying.
Well, we're not quite done.
He lived in the neighborhood?
Yes.
That's fucking wild.
Just wait. Now, before his execution, at some point, Ted was interviewed by Dr. Ronald Holmes, who is an associate professor. It's that bourbon making my tongue thick.
It'll twist
in
it up.
criminal justice, studying serial killers. And according to Dr. Holmes, Bundy described a time when he stalked, strangled, and sexually mauled his first victim.
Okay.
Who was an 8-year-old girl who went missing from her home in Tacoma, Washington. Now, don't respond. Dr. Holmes took this revelation even further in a paper he presented at a conference in Colorado.
Sweet.
In this paper, Holmes stated that Bundy told him that he, quote, stashed the body of Anne Marie Burr in a muddy pit, possibly near the University of Puget Sound, end quote. With a smirk on his face. I added that part. But that's the implication.
Creepy smirk on
And
his
Holmes
face.
was adamant that that is what Bundy had reportedly told him.
If you think about Ted Bundy's smirk on a 14-year-old boy. But imagine like the mouth the same size. Like it is actually a creepy sight. Like imagining him as 14 and you've seen those pictures where every now and then somebody catches a smile of his that's just not quite right. Outside of that, he usually looks like how could that guy do it?
Correct.
But every now and then you see one where you're like, oh,
and
there's
if
some evil
he
there.
knew Anne, he would have recognized Don, her dad. He would have known that they were out there looking for this little girl whom, according to Dr. Holmes, Bundy just murdered, sexually mauled. I don't even know. I have an idea what that could mean. And he's just smiling at him, kicking dirt on presumably his daughter's body.
Hearing. Was that where they were at?
Yes, the University of Puget Sound.
Okay. Has anybody checked there?
Well, I don't think they have. And despite these stories in the report made by Dr. Holmes, Anne Marie Burr, her missing persons case remains unsolved. In 2011, investigators did try to test the biological material from the scene against DNA from Ted Bundy, but the biological material did not yield sufficient DNA sequences to allow for testing.
But the palm print?
Nothing. Nothing was ever mentioned of that.
I mean, the fingerprints are so weird in the early times. It's like they took it all, but they couldn't really do anything with it.
And I'm not sure anybody would have ever taken Ted Bundy's palm print. That's a very specific.
No. When was he caught? 80s?
They took his teeth print, but I
guarantee you they have this whole hand. That's what they do. They take all your fingerprints.
In the 70s? I don't think so.
I thought he went to the 80s, early 80s.
He was on death row in the 80s.
Oh, was he?
1980, he was already on death row.
I'll have to look it up.
Well, you might not have to.
Oh, yeah?
I'm about ready to outro. Do you want to discuss anything else?
I think this whiskey's really good. If you're a whiskey connoisseur or like it at all, go check out Woodinville and hold it up to the camera here. There you go. Woodinville bourbon whiskey. This is their just base one. It's not expensive at all, but then they have expensive ones which I imagine are really good, and I'm definitely going to try them out. That's it. Let's hear the outro.
Now, Ted Bundy went from being that 14-year-old boy delivering newspapers in Tacoma, Washington, to becoming one of America's most notorious serial killers. Officially known to have killed 30 girls, unofficially, potentially responsible for as many as 100. I don't know exactly why he wouldn't tell the truth to Beverly if he had, in fact, did abduct and murder 8-year-old Anne Marie Burr, especially if he was already on death row. But when you hear what Theodore Robert Bundy was capable of, inflicting that emotional pain on Beverly Burr makes total sense for the sadist that is Ted Bundy, who once said, and I quote, "I am the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you will ever meet." End quote. Oh, and about what Ted Bundy is capable of? Well, we are going to dive into all of that on the next 2 episodes.